Can we start? Well, first of all, welcome. It's good to see so many people here in Barnsley Town Hall, attending your meeting of Barnsley Save Our NHS, which is to discuss and perhaps protest about the changes which have been planned for maternity and paediatric services in Barnsley. We have a panel of 4 speakers, so I'll introduce to you in a minute, but you'll see that there are 2 empty chairs, one on either end. The original intention of this was to make this an information meeting, and Barnsley CCG and the integrated care system people were invited, but in those famous words of government, no one was available. Let me introduce myself. I'm Malcolm Clements. I'm a Barnsley councillor. I've got a lifelong interest in the NHS, mainly because I was born 7 weeks before it came into being, and my father had to pay half a week's wages to have me delivered. And he chided me about that for a long time. It took me 12 or 13 years before I came up with a reasonable argument that it was more his fault than mine. But there we go. I am interested in what's been going on in the NHS over the last few years, mainly under the overall banner of the Sustainability and Transformation Programme. And it first came to light a couple of years ago, and I read about this thing and I started to read about it, and the high-level language that was used was all about mum and apple pie. No one would disagree with the high-level objectives of STP. But then, of course, hidden away in the detail was suddenly this figure for South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw of £550 million that had to be saved somehow by 2020. When I started to delve into it, the thing that really got up my nose was that all of this has been done under the radar. Yes, some of the meetings are public, but hardly anyone attends, there's hardly any publicity about it, there's very little coverage in the press, and there's never any mention of the financial implications of the proposals that are there. So that's what's really got me into what's going on with STP, and I think it's got into a lot of other people as well.
You want to try it?
Is this working?
Switch down at the bottom. There's a little switch at the bottom.
It's a little switch at the bottom.
It's on, Matt.
It's on. Right, okay. Is it working?
No, it doesn't sound any different.
No, it didn't sound any different. Well, I've got a loud enough voice. So let me say that, so far as I'm aware, there are no fire alarms, so if it does go off, then it is for real. Please make your way to the stairs. The stairs at both ends of the building, and fire exits are signposted.
Just tested the microphone, as you can hear, it is actually working.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
It's one of them mics that works sometimes and sometimes doesn't work.
Right. Okay. The format of the meeting is that we're going to have presentations by 4 speakers. After that, it's really open to you. It'll be open to the floor for questions and or comments. And then we'll wrap up towards the end, and we're scheduling here until about 3:30. We'll wrap up at the end with final remarks from the speakers. Last but not least, we will have a collection because someone has to pay for the room and we've had to hire it from Barnsley Council, so there will be a bucket at the end. So the 4 speakers that we've got today, firstly we've got Terry Barrow, who is a Women's Officer for Penistone and Stocksbridge Labour Party. Then we've got Mavis Kirkham, who's going to talk about maternity services and is a midwife. Then Kerrin, who works in children's paediatrics in Barnsley Hospital. And finally, all the way from Liverpool, it's been a long journey today because of the rail strikes, we've got Felicity Dowling, who's going to talk about the wider austerity issues and comes from a background of being active in the campaign over Liverpool Women's Hospital. So without any further ado, I'd like to ask Terry to begin.
What am I supposed to do with this?
Just talking to me.
Does it fit in this somehow? disastrous. It could pop out at any second. Right, I'm actually really nervous about this and I didn't think I would be, so bear with me. I'm not here today just as a Labour Party spokesperson, although I am Sheffield LCF's equality spokesperson and Penistone and Stocksbridge's women's officer. But I'm actually an ex-nurse, and I'm a mum, and I'm a grandma. And I'm going to start with a really simple fact. South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw integrated care system needs to make £571 million worth of savings by 2021. That's just a fact. That's just how it is. It's not optional, it's been agreed. And it's going to do this by contracting out services to the cheapest bidder. And it doesn't matter who that bidder is. And even if people in this room don't have a moral issue with privatisation in the NHS, and I personally do, obviously, because I'm a member of the Labour Party, but even if you don't have a moral issue with privatisation, let's actually look at some of the facts. Cleaning in the NHS was privatised, and there are studies that show that levels of MRSA in facilities with privatised cleaning contracts was higher than in those that weren't. Catering was privatised. We've got malnourished patients in our hospitals in this day and age, malnourished patients, and they're being fed for less than £5 a day, not a meal, a day. Waste management was privatised, and we saw on the telly last week, didn't we, that somebody somewhere's got spare legs and arms stored behind their desks because they couldn't do anything else with them. I mean, it's shambolic. But now we're actually talking about privatising care. We're talking about private midwifery practices. Midwifery practices that are going to need a whole new level of accreditation brought in just because the NHS aren't training them anymore. We don't need that if we stick with the system we've got. Private companies doing your scans, private companies running your diagnostics and your lab tests. Do we honestly think that the results of those privatisations are going to be any better than the last tranche of privatisations? More to the point, do we honestly think that these privatisations are being done to improve the services, or do we think they're being done to save money? Our area suffers from some of the worst deprivation in the country, and we know that that affects our region's health really quite significantly. Poor housing, diet, air quality, high levels of obesity, alcohol-related admissions, I keep saying admissions when I practice this, but it is admissions, smoking when pregnant, asthma, other childhood illnesses and childhood accidents are all higher in parts of this region than the national average. And our hospitals are already struggling to cope with those figures. So how can the answer possibly be? How can the answer possibly be? Let's make £571 million worth of closures and let's close some of the units near where those people live. Just doesn't make any sense, does it? The answer has to be to invest in our services and to recruit more doctors and nurses. So let's look at what they're proposing for the care of the acutely ill child. And this is taken straight from the Health Service report itself. This is their figures, it's nothing to do with me. And their own report says, verbatim, that option 0, the status quo, and option 1 are not considered feasible because of staff shortages. That's what their report says. It's not what I'm saying, that's what their report says. So that means that they're lining us up here for at least 2 district hospitals to lose their inpatient children's units. And all they'll have in place are part-time paediatric assessment units. So what about maternity provision? If I take you back to those deprivation stats and the associated health risks that I mentioned with them, our region has higher than the average number of medium or high risk mums. We're coming in at around 75% of mums in that category. And that means, guidance says, they have to give birth in a consultant-led unit. So let's just look at that. At the minute, we have a consultant-led unit in every area. Any closure, even one closure, any closure, means that in the area that they close the unit, 75%, 3/4 of all the mums in that area are going to have to travel further for the maternity care. The other quarter will only have local access to either a home birth or a birth in a midwifery-led unit, standalone, no consultant cover and no paediatric or neonatal support. Now, I have to say that I'm absolutely all for choice, and if mums choose to give birth at home and they're low risk, I would absolutely support that choice to my last breath. But what I will not support ever are mums being forced to give birth at home because there isn't a bed available to them locally. And that's what we could be talking about here. And the other crime here is what happens if anything goes wrong with one of those mums. And this is where it gets really personal for me. I want to tell you about my daughter and my grandson here. This is Alex and Hugo. Hugo's 2.5 now and he's an absolute horror. But, you know, he was quite gorgeous then. My daughter Alex was a low-risk mum. 26 years old, excellent health, good diet, exercise regime, no health conditions, completely easy and uneventful pregnancy. It was just fantastic. And she went into labour and we went up to Jessop's, which is set up really nicely with a midwifery unit, consultant unit, and all the neonatal paediatric stuff on site. She went in, we went into a room, we didn't even know we were on a midwifery-led unit, but we went into this room and she started and things started going wrong. And they put Alex on her bed and they wheeled the bed down the corridor through some double doors and a consultant came in and we were on the consultant-led unit. Can you imagine if she had to go in an ambulance for 20 miles at that point? Because that's what we're talking about here. That's what we're talking about here. So all of a sudden she's in a consultant-led unit and that was great. And things progressed and Alex got an infection and she started showing signs of sepsis and became really very poorly. Hugo was born and he was absolutely totally unresponsive. And they put him on a little resuscitation table behind her head where she couldn't see, but I could. The room was full of all these people, all these specialists from the neonatal unit. They just rushed in and I could see them doing CPR on this tiny baby. And then they wheeled the unit out while they were still working on him, down the corridor into the special care baby unit. Imagine if that had been a 20-mile ambulance journey. Just imagine that. And the reason that, they were both in hospital for a week and they were both on horrible, poor lad, he was on IV gentamicin at zero months old and it's like domestos, isn't it? But, I tell you this because I honestly believe that if Alex had had that baby in a standalone midwifery unit, that at least Hugo would be dead. Yeah. And I actually think that there's a distinct possibility that Alex might have been dead as well. That's why I feel really strongly about these proposals. These changes, let's be honest about this, these changes, they are not about improving services. They're about privatisation, they're about cutting beds, they're about saving money, and they're about staff shortages. And they're not about people. That's what they should be about. That's what we should be looking at. And so I just urge you all today, please spread the word, tell your friends, take the information that's here today, listen to the other speakers, and get involved in the fight to save our NHS. And thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm a midwife. I've spent my career as a clinical midwife and doing research into midwifery. And I've done this because midwifery has stunningly good clinical outcomes. Having worked for a long time in a midwife-led unit, I differ from Terry slightly, but I absolutely respect her experience. Midwife-led units have very good outcomes, but don't have the, should we say, somewhat overzealous intervention that pressures of time create on our obstetric colleagues in the big units, which is one reason that birth goes very well in midwife-led units, and we have the stats to prove it. But birth goes very well with good midwifery care, and the outcomes knock on in a very positive way throughout the life of the baby and the family. But this only happens with decent staffing and with continuity of care. This happens in situations where people know and trust their midwife. Clearly, you are much more likely to know and trust your midwife if the service is local. And therefore, from a midwifery point of view, I'm totally opposed to centralisation. Because the further from the mother the big baby machine is, the more impersonal the service. And I think it's very important to bear in mind that we have a service that could achieve so much which has been so under-resourced that it sadly achieves less and less. So I'm opposing this closure because centralisation means less continuity of midwifery care. And because I feel, having looked around the country, that the proposed midwife unit, and I've worked in midwife unit and it broke my heart when the one I worked in was closed, but I think this is just a political ploy to the people of Barnsley to make the cuts a little bit more acceptable. I had some visiting midwifery colleagues from Dewsbury from China last week, and I took them to see the midwives unit in Dewsbury. I took them to Dewsbury because I tried to take them to the flagship centre in Birmingham and found it had just been shut. I wanted to take them to the one in Dewsbury, but I found it was closed until the 5th of November because of staff illness, i.e. one person was having elective surgery and it was managed so tightly there wasn't leeway. So I took these Chinese midwives to Dewsbury, and there's a gorgeous standalone midwives unit in Dewsbury with state-of-the-art equipment, beautiful birth pools, fabulous unit, lovely staff, which has been there for just over 2 years since the consultant unit in Dewsbury closed, so it's exactly parallel with the situation here. And so I asked them about it, and largely ancient clientele, not the people you would often think would be most drawn to a midwife-led unit and potential for water births and things. First year they opened it, they had over 400 births, it was a great centre, everybody loved it. The next year they had 45. When I asked the manager, she said, in very polite and slightly formal terms, we occasionally have to close for reasons of safety. Now, if you say this to a mother, she would reasonably think, this unit's unsafe, I don't want to have a baby there. Or it might be shut when I go into labour, I don't have a baby there. Sorry. What have I done? I think I can manage without, but anyway. When I asked her what this term, occasionally closed for reasons of safety, she said, when the Pontefract consultant unit labour ward is so short of staff it becomes unsafe, we have to close Dewsbury and take the midwives to Pontefract. Yes. That's what it means. And is it any wonder? They're deliberately starving that unit in Dewsbury to patch together the cracks in the understaffing in Pontefract, and the next thing that will happen will be that it will close, because there's a national pattern. You centralise, you close a consultant unit, you set up a midwives unit as a sop to the local population, then you starve it, then you shut it. This happened in Wakefield. Birth centre was a sop to the population, they starved it, they shut it. It happened in Huddersfield, sop, starve, shut. It happened in Salford. It happened in Cardiff. It happened in Brent. It happened in Dunfermline. It happened in Maidstone. It happened in Montrose. It happened in Honiton. It happened in Oakhampton. And I could go on. There's a definite pattern. Set this mock-up, not serious midwives unit. Starve it. Shut it. And alongside that, we've had loads of long-standing midwives units that have been shut. The wonderful one at Halcyon in Birmingham, Whitby, Malton, Darley-Dale, which is where I work, Buxton, Horsham in Bristol, and loads more. We know the pattern. It's a pattern of starvation of services, and it's unacceptable. I don't see any detail in these proposals of any expansion of existing services. When we close the consultant unit in Barnsley, what's going to happen to the women? Because services are really, really strapped in all the other consultant units. And midwives are leaving, and I led the team that did the research on this. Midwives are leaving because they are so hard-pressed they can't do the service that they were paid and trained to provide. It breaks their hearts. Midwives are getting horrendous occupational diseases because they can't go to the toilet, let alone have meal breaks. This is a service that's at cracking point. So, to conclude, this centralisation leads to worse care for everyone. It leads to great cost for local families. It leads to more babies being born before they arrive at the place they should be born, but it's strangely impossible to get the stats for that now. The figures aren't being collected, funny, isn't it? And it leaves you with midwives who are more stressed, with more occupational health illnesses, and more likely to leave. So these proposals, in my view, simply feed a vicious circle of cuts and centralisation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? So just to say who I am, I'm a local paediatrician. I've been here for 17 years now in Barnsley, even though I've not picked up the accent. Live just down the road, had a sort of bit of a cold, brisk walk here. Our 2 children were born in Barnsley. I've had treatment at the hospital, and I'm proud to work there. I'm proud to support it. And I suppose what I'm about to say, I think, genuinely reflects the views of my sort of colleagues and staff at the hospital. I think in terms of the broader point, I do have concerns about what's happening broadly within the NHS in relation to funding, cherry-picking of services, for privatisation and so on, and accountability. But actually, for the purposes of what we're going to be talking about now, I don't think those broader issues necessarily relate to the Hospital Services Review in relation to children's services. So I'm just going to focus specifically on the issues as I can see them in the reports and the potential implications. And as a paediatrician, I always sort of like to see the good in everything. So I think there's probably a couple of points I ought to make for the purpose of fairness from the start. The general concept of looking at services across the region and checking they're going to be fit for the future and fit for purpose isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, regional health authorities used to look at whole populations before there were changes and before the purchase provider split came in the 90s under the Conservatives. So actually looking at the whole population and trying to plan ahead and seeing if services effective and right isn't necessarily a bad thing. And it's not going to be necessarily physically possible to provide every single service in every single place. And sometimes it's not money that's the limiting factor. There can be other things there in terms of the workforce training that you've got available. And I think it's probably only fair to say that some of the people involved in the service review probably are genuinely motivated by wanting doing the right thing and looking at the whole population. So I wouldn't want to necessarily impugn people who are involved in this process and think that they're necessarily deliberately trying to do the wrong thing. I think secondly, we all know, you've heard, that their proposals or the options are changes from the status quo to consider changes of 1 or 2 units to short-stay paediatric units only. But I think it's only fair to say that no decision's yet been made about that. Any plans are looking into 2019, so they're at the stage where they've not looked at any units specifically. So no one at this point is saying that Barnsley is going to close or change, but it's just one of the things that may be considered as an option. And I think the other thing, and just to reassure everyone here, the hospital management and all of the clinicians and so on don't want there to be any change. We're all happy with what we have and the good services we provide. Another, you know that the Tiny Hearts Appeal, we're just opening a new neonatal unit in the next couple of weeks. They've appointed a couple of new consultant colleagues who work alongside myself and a couple of other colleagues recently. So they're not the actions of a hospital which is necessarily planning for any changes to what we've got. And I think it's only fair to stress that. But however, the reason we're all here is because there is the potential for that to change. That's really what we want to talk about. And also just want to make sure that everyone is informed about what's being discussed, where things are up to at the moment, and what might happen in the future, so we all have a role and a voice in that. I think myself and my colleagues do have some concerns about some of the assumptions that are made when drawing up these various options that have been mentioned. And also the point you've already heard, that if there are any changes that do happen to paediatrics, say in Barnsley, that will have a knock-on effect with maternity services and vice versa, so they're very much interlinked. And I think the Health Service Review does totally understand that you can't have paediatric services changing without an impact upon maternity and vice versa. So as you've heard, the options, you saw on the slide before that Terry showed, that from the status quo, where you've got 6 units across South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw, one of the suggestions is that 1 or 2 of those would go to a place where you've got a paediatric service that only operates 14 hours a day, and then you wouldn't necessarily have overnight paediatric services. So that would mean that sick children in those units would have to transfer elsewhere overnight, or wouldn't actually be taken there if they became unwell overnight and they travelled further to another unit. That would obviously have the knock-on effect. If there's no inpatient paediatric service, there wouldn't be a neonatal service, and therefore you wouldn't have a high-risk maternity services in those areas. The suggestions that have been made in paediatrics about the health services review aren't really being made on the basis of money, as far as I can tell reading the report, and I've read it in a lot of detail. And in actual fact, any change to inpatient services are likely to actually cost more. The reason they're proposing that 1 or 2 units may need to change and lose their inpatient services is based on the projection of particularly consultant paediatricians who are likely to be available, numbers that are likely to be available further down the line, about 5 years' time. So when you hear about staff shortages, it's not so much about cuts, it's about looking ahead and saying, will there be enough paediatricians who are trained and available to staff these units? It's a reasonable question to consider. But of course, workforce planning is quite difficult to do accurately. You're trying to predict something in the future, and various things may change. And it's not necessary to say that Barnsley will be one of those ones where it may be difficult to recruit or attract people, because if we've already got a really good service that's continued to function well, we may not be faced with staff shortages because we may be putting ourselves in a good enough position to attract those people that are out there. And as I say, we've had recent investment in new paediatric consultants in Barnsley, so we're not in the process of sort of trying to downscale things, it's more the other way around. I'm not in a position to comment about other hospitals elsewhere. I don't know enough about them. I don't know enough about those situations. All I can talk about is Barnsley specifically. If we did reduce to an inpatient, what you call an SSPAU, which is a short-stay paediatric assessment unit, the implications for that would be considerable. So if that did ever happen, you'd be talking about 6 to 20 children who would usually be the number staying on a ward overnight, having to transfer elsewhere or not come to Barnsley in the first place. These are children who we are already managing clinically well and safely, and so there wouldn't necessarily be a clinical benefit for the children. And of course, it's a big impact upon all of those families. You can imagine that multiplied every night of the week, the implications that would have. The Health Services Review does talk about travel times, but actually what they're talking about is travel times for ambulances to sort of go to another unit. What they don't talk about is the travel for families or children in that area and the impact it would have upon them. And we've already heard, we work in an area of high deprivation where the population have very limited resources, so having to transfer and move to other hospitals and for children there would have a very disproportionate impact upon, I think, a local populations, perhaps compared to more affluent populations. You've also heard that if we do less here, the slack is going to be taken up will need to be taken up elsewhere because the children are still going to need the services. So there's not been as much in the Health Services Review about where else children would go and whether they'd be able to expand. And if the argument is on the potential shortfall in paediatric consultants, but you're sending the children elsewhere, they're still going to need the paediatric consultants elsewhere to look after them. So in terms of some of that workforce modelling, we do have some issues about that. In terms of the quality of the consultation, there were clinical working groups, and they did have people who were listed in the annex of the report, including some of my colleagues. But I think the feeling for some of my colleagues that with the views of the district general hospitals weren't always heeded as much as maybe they otherwise ought to be. And this cross-linking of neonatal services and so on, and the recognition of that, they felt they had to fight quite hard to make sure that was included in the report, which ultimately it was. Some of the consultations, in terms of how well the meetings were advertised, you've heard there were meetings, but some of them had very few people. So even though there might have been efforts on the behalf of the people doing the Health Services Review to reach out to the public, it clearly wasn't that effective if so few people were attending, and the fact that not so many people know about these changes. So if you're looking about an effective consultation, I think that's an issue. I think some of the questions that they asked for the public consultation were a bit bland. And you'll see that on that slide up there. So for acutely ill children, it talks about more care for children at home and community. Well, we try to do that anyway. We've got fantastic community children's nurses. That's not something new that we're not already trying to do. And it says, seriously ill children cared for in units with more specialists. But actually that's sort of got a bit of an implication. That's not happening at the moment. The children being cared for where people don't have the specialist skills. And also, myself and my colleagues, if we ever have clinical concerns about a child and we feel our needs would be better met in a central unit such as Sheffield, we will be the ones making those phone calls. We will ensure that those children get safe care. We will only continue to look after children overnight here if we feel it's safe to do so. And we've got very good support from specialists in Sheffield and from transfer team to make sure that we do the right safe thing and the right thing by children. So some of the implications of some of the questions, if people are asked, do you think you might travel a bit further to get better care, who's going to say no to that? That almost implies that that's not what's happening at the moment, and that's something that makes us feel a bit uncomfortable. So in summary, I'm perhaps a bit more optimistic than some of the speakers here. There aren't any imminent plans to reduce maternity and children's services at Barnsley, and the hospital management and clinicians would be strongly against this anyway. However, there is a process underway where such changes could be specifically proposed for Barnsley in 2019, and I do have concerns, and my colleagues do have concerns, that decisions could be made without informed and meaningful public consultation, and that plans could be developed which don't actually have the support of local doctors, nurses, midwives and hospital managers. So I think we need to be vigilant, and that's why we're all here. We need to ensure that our voices are heard, and we need to protect the high quality of what we believe are sustainable services locally.
Thank you. The NHS, when it was given to our generation, was a public service, publicly provided and not for profit. It was a national service, not broken up into small areas that are much easier to privatise. It was intended to be scientifically based on science, with scientific studies running all the way through it, and it has created a huge scientific body of knowledge, a huge body of data on health, which is unparalleled in the world. And it's one of the reasons the privatisers want their hands on it. We had a comprehensive service, not one that said, well, you can't have your hip operation until it's this bad, or you can only have one eye done, or only one hearing aid, or you can only have one turn on the fertility treatments, and all the other horrible cuts that are going on at the moment in terms of rationing service. We had a major education and training base. Remember, the NHS is the largest private employer, bar the Chinese army, probably in the world. And it employs the most skilled people in the world. Now let that sink in. This is an organisation which the state has produced by providing free care to everyone at a price much lower, massively lower than America, and lower than most other countries, and produced really good outcomes from it. But going right back to the days of Mrs. Blair thinking she could open up little health service things in Sainsbury's, which went bust, fortunately. Mrs. Blair's thing did. But now we have 70% of stuff that's commissioned for the NHS going to private providers. 70%. We are not, despite the wonderful, wonderful way the NHS have with language, where they would have you believe that black was white, that cuts were expansion, that consultation was listening to people. We know that they are consistently working to privatise the NHS. And what we've got now is a slightly different initiative. It's no accident that Mr. Hunt has gone on to be the Foreign Secretary. He's not lost his interest in health. He's very interested in what's happening in free trade. We've now got a situation where, with the 44 Sustainability and Transformation Acts, the country's been cut up into bits which are big enough for the big American companies to manage. They couldn't have managed the NHS, but they can manage these chunks. And what's happening is that they're not going to be handing them out in the way that the commissioning groups have been doing. I don't know about around here, but where I am, all the commissioning groups are combining, and they're appointing accountable care officers, and they're managing the accountable care system. What that means is there'll be one sum of money which is given to one organisation to manage all the health in that area. Not in the way the NHS does, but in a way which is, that's all you've got, that's all we're going to spend. It's the model of accountable care from the United States. Read it. It's not just me. I am telling you doom and gloom, and I'm telling you you've got to fight for it. But it is not just me. I'm not an expert. I came into this game because one night, I used to be a teacher. Ofsted were in school, and I was sitting up very late. And there was an announcement came over that they were going to close Liverpool Women's Hospital. Hell they are. And I set up there and then a petition, before I went to sleep that night, to set up a petition on the internet. Now, I used to have a big rule about family not phoning me at school, and especially not during Ofsted. But I got a phone call into the house, into the school, saying, have you seen that petition? It's in the thousands already. And we developed, from that petition, we developed a campaign that's been going on now since 2015 to save Liverpool Women's Hospital. And we had to learn on our feet how to save that hospital. It's not safe yet, it's still there. Big cheers, it's still there. It's not safe yet at all. Some of you will have heard the wonderful story of what's gone on with the Royal Hospital in Liverpool, where it was given as a PFI. Now, a PFI means that the first charge on any hospital is the PFI. It's like a mortgage. And they had no control over the money. Nobody controlled the money. If you look at Cumbria Infirmary, that by the time its PFI is paid off, it's going to cost £1 million, £1 billion, not a million, £1 billion. The actual build was less than 200 million. The cost is the PFI, and guess what? That hospital's not fire safe. The fire brigade wanted to close it down because it was so unfire safe. Read it up. Don't believe me. Read it up. In Liverpool, Kerrin was building our hospital. We began to hear rumours that the concrete was broken. The people working on it were talking about the concrete that they'd built the new hospital on was not right. Turns out that Kerrin was, scrimping and saving, and there wasn't quite enough concrete in the area. Kerrin paid 3 months later. Other people were paying at the time. So we've got major cracks in this new building. The atrium might well fall down, and the foundations are faulty. Finally, the government agreed to the PFI was coming to the end of its contractual period. They had to have it finished by that time, or the contract was finished. They've just come to an agreement with the PFI company to pay them £42 million to break the contract. So the cost of breaking the contract is £42 million, and the government is paying for the rest of that, of the rest of the build, the repairs. We don't know how long it will take, and they're not making good the damage that was done to the local companies working on it. Meanwhile, the actual Royal Hospital is in a terrible state. One night it had no water, one night it had no electricity. We did an FOI about the no water one. We were told, oh, it's perfectly safe. Interesting to know what the doctors think about this. It's perfectly safe to use wipes and to use gel instead of water. How do you manage without electricity in an intensive care unit? Another issue. Anyhow, so the old one's falling down. The new one is flawed and should restart at the very latest, the beginning of next year. And what they wanted to do was move the women's to that site. We didn't like the idea. We don't like the idea, and we will fight that idea, but we'll fight it on a number of grounds. First of all, if you want to read the worst that the NHS has got to write in terms of saying one thing and meaning another, read the maternity review. The maternity review is written by Baroness Cumberledge, and they'd have you believe she was some kind of saint. She's a Tory peer with family interests in privatisation. And she argues for the breakup of the big hospitals, more home births and more private providers. We have a private provider in Liverpool called One-to-One Maternity. Look out for them, they're like a rash, they get everywhere. One-to-One Maternity has, again, Google it, safety records, see what the CQC have got to say about it. And we have a serious problem with them. But my daughter-in-law, we're into daughter-in-laws today, my daughter-in-law was told that's who would provide her maternity care. And just to go on to the little stories as well. Things went wrong. I got a call, can you come up and mind the other kids? Went up to mind the other kids. She was eventually, took ages. Ambulance arrived and took her off to hospital. And the young, and I am sexist, the young male midwife says, well, come in tomorrow and empty the birth pool. I mean, there's 2 toddlers in this house. You're not leaving a pool of water anywhere. I don't know how to empty it. So we literally sat down with him with the instruction booklet and worked out how to empty the pool. I prefer NHS midwives. And I think for good reason. So, seriously, where are we up to? We're up to a very, very intense period of cuts in the NHS. They don't listen to you. They did the consultation for the women's and they put paper tablecloths on the tables and asked people to write their comments. Now, I took photos of them. And then they wrote up the comments. What we'd said wasn't in their write-up, but we did have the photographs. It literally was not a reflection of what was said. I contacted them and said, we currently have 35,000 signatures on our petition. Will you consider that as being put into your consultation? Oh yes, thank you for telling me that. Then they said, everybody agreed with their consultation. Anyhow, we've done, over this summer, we've contacted 4,000 individual people, speaking one-to-one with them, through stalls and the like. We've had huge public support, but it's not to do with anyone saying everything's perfect. We all know it's not perfect. They signed the petition, but they talked to us, and this bloke said, I'm not signing that. And I went, come on, tell me why, what's going on? And he said, he was born on our front path because we were sent home from the women's. I went, what the hell happened? And apparently the paramedics arrived, and the paramedics were told, not the paramedic, the ambulance arrived, and the ambulance didn't have paramedics on it, so they couldn't touch the mother or the baby, so he had to deliver his own baby on the path outside the house. But they'd been sent home from the hospital being told that they weren't far enough on. No, he actually was lovely, the whole family were lovely. She was saying, don't take any notice of him, it's a wonderful hospital, it's a stupid thing to have happened. But we don't have any illusions that it's not there. And we also know that for all we've got it safe now, it's probably been leached out from the bottom. Services sent out to little clinics around the place. And some more things being sent to other hospitals. Anyone who wants to talk to me about that in detail, I'll bore you to death for hours, but seriously, we ran a major campaign. We got big support from the community, we got big support from some of the trade unions. Not so much the trade unions in the NHS, they are more wary, they are more scared of being publicly involved. We got a lot of support from midwives, but they won't do it publicly because they are afraid of a bullying culture in the NHS. trained 2,000 midwives last year from the hospitals, just over 2,000. And we got an equivalent, and I've lost my figures here, but it was less than 50 actually ended up improving the figures. It's not that they didn't go in, they did go in, but the ones at the other end left. And people are leaving literally, as was mentioned before, because of the level of stress. But that's true of nurses too. Stress for the workforce is really important. So, we've also got, am I all right for time?
No.
Very quickly. We've also got a major push at the moment for combining health and social care. Social care was privatised many moons ago and is dreadful. And it's not just that they don't train their staff properly, it's not just that they pay their staff properly, it's that hedge funds own a huge chunk of social care in this country. Now those of you that follow football, I am Councillor, talk football metaphors, and those of you who follow football will know that some of the big football clubs were bought and then they were loaded with debt. They were used to borrow huge amounts of money and could easily therefore go bankrupt. That happens with social care as well, with old people's homes. The people running them have very little to do with owning them, and every now and again you hear of a company just going bust and the old people having to be shifted out. Social care is run for profit and you pay for it. The NHS is run for need and it's paid for by general taxation. Combining the two is very dangerous. I fully support the idea of a national care service, a properly funded, properly trained, properly educated national care service. That's not what's happening. At my local CC, health and welfare, what do you call it, the council one, the woman who's the accountable care officer for our area said we don't need more hospital beds, but we do need some more care beds. So we'll commission some from the private companies. Our money, paid for by the NHS, going into the pockets of people who are not committed in the same way. So, what do? There's a big health campaigns together are organising a conference in early November about about health and social care. Please do try and send some people along to it. Thank you. To make sure you're represented on it and you know, and talk to care workers to get them there. We've also got to talk to the people who work in the NHS, their unions, and just look what the nurses got in terms of a pay deal, and they had the Royal College telling them to accept that deal. So we've got a long way to go with talking to them, but we've got to talk to all of the trade unions to make them realise if they were in the States and they were negotiating, they would be negotiating healthcare packages. We do it for them. They've got to defend the NHS. It's got to be the biggest thing we do. We've got to say to every EU nurse, EU doctor and EU midwife, for God's sake stay. We desperately need you. We cannot risk losing any more of you. And we've got to train more doctors, more nurses and pay them well. General election would certainly help along the way, but we've got a huge issue, a really big issue we're dealing with. This is not, what you have here is simply one little example of what's going on in a national level, and we need every one of you as warriors for the NHS. Thank you.
We are running over time a little, so this next half hour or so, I'm sure we can push it out a bit beyond that, but not much more beyond that, is over to you. So any questions or comments, please indicate, and you can either make a comment or ask a question of someone on the panel. I have to say that I am partially sighted and I don't see very well, so don't be shy about shouting Malcolm or whatever, in order to attract my attention. So, who would like to say something or make a comment or a question? Yes.
Yeah, I'll stand up. I was in the hospital for a considerable period of time over the summer. Now I have to say that my personal care was, for the most part, exemplary. After my surgery, I should have been in intensive care overnight as a precaution. I ended up in there 6 days. The staff were amazing. I was moved to high dependency. The staff were amazing. I moved to the general ward again. They cope with everything. When I got really depressed because something had gone wrong and I was depressed and angry and I wanted somebody to blame, and there was nobody to blame, it was just bad luck. They gave me what I needed. And then we're not talking about mental health nurses here. There were general nurses on a general surgery ward. But they were brilliant with me. Contrast that, I mean, just to make the point, I needed a second surgery which wasn't very big. But it could have gone badly wrong because I'd already had abdominal surgery that were in the same area. And they didn't know exactly what my problem was. When I went into theatre, there was, and I didn't see them, but I was told there was 10 consultants in that room, from a general surgeon to an anaesthetist to the person that controlled the endoscopy implement and actually did what needed to be done. But there was 10 people in that room because they didn't know what had gone wrong and what was going to go wrong if they interfered. I could have needed massive surgery, it could have been disastrous. Contrast that with something as simple as what I found out a week ago today, when I, just by happen chance, saw a friend's daughter in town. And I asked how her mum was. And she says, oh, she's been sectioned. But the problem is, it wasn't that she was sectioned for mental health issues. She was sectioned because she has dementia, but she has mental health issues, and she tried to strangle her daughter. Great, she's been sectioned, she's getting the care she needs. Well, yeah, but she lives in Highland. The hospital is in Dewsbury. Now, she's got dementia, she needs familiarity, she needs routine, she needs family, she needs friends. That is so difficult. They can't possibly give her what she needs because she's so far away. But if she'd had the social care she needed in the first place, it may not even have been necessary. They have struggled for 2 years to get help, and they couldn't, because the cuts have cut so deeply that there just isn't the staff to provide it. It's not that nobody wants to and says cope on your own. It just isn't there, and what is there isn't the extent that we thought that we saw our grandparents getting. I mean, when we recognised a problem with my grandmother, she had dementia, she got the care she needed. When she needed to go into a care home, she went into a care home. That's not happening now, and it is so frightening. Through DPAC, I know lots of people that require social care. I don't know anybody that hasn't had it cut back, and I know far too many that's lost it altogether. And they're relying on people that are either having to give up the jobs and put extra strain on the benefit system, or they're on their own, and you just cope the best you can. The worst example I know of is a disabled mother with a disabled daughter, and they're not sure who's the carer there, because they have to care for each other, and they don't live together. They don't live far apart, but they don't live together. And that's the situation.
And of course what we're talking about today is the information that's in that document and the possibility of some of it coming about. All I really want to say about that, it's not so much about the information in the document. It's more about the fact that the way that they go about doing what they do, e.g. the clinical commissioning group and the now other organisations which are all acronym, sorry, is acronym right? Yeah. That we kind of get used to, but other people would think with you know, ICS, ICO, ICA, it goes on and on, right? So what we find is that we get tangled up in this kind of I don't know what you call it, hospital review speak, if you want, which, you know, after a while you just phase out and go into a trance. But anyway, we basically think that that's part of what they want. We think that they want us not to understand it, and we think it's written in such a way that it's not clear, and we think that, and we also know for sure, because we've been attending some of the meetings, or we know about the meetings that we're not being allowed to attend, that a lot of this is being done in secret. It's a secret process, right? And I think that if more people were aware of what is going off, including some of the stuff that's being said today, this room would be full, right? It would be packed. We wouldn't be able to get enough people in it, because we've got to be fully aware that it for sure is, and we know this from being involved, is about privatisation. That's what I think personally, and it's about selling bits of the NHS or letting private companies run bits of the NHS and making a profit out of it. And ultimately, if you want my prediction, I think that it's about Barnsley Hospital shutting down, closing down, right? And we'll not have a hospital anymore. We've only got to look at what they've done to Huddersfield Royal Infirmary.
To amalgamate the social services side of things, the old people's homes of the council, to bring them up to standard, to NHS standard. When we did that, eventually we had 2 homes that were actually running. One was Highfield Grange and one was Greenside at Mapplewell. While those units were actually running, it was mainly for patients that had perhaps had hip replacements, knee replacements, or needed real good rehabilitation services. During that period, the actual standard of bed blocking levels were actually reduced. And for about a period of 2 years before the funding cuts, Barnsley had very, very good records of reduction in bed blocking.
Well, we epidermolysis bullosa. I don't know if many people know, it's a very rare skin condition. And for 15 weeks, palliative care, for 15 weeks of his life, it took up huge resources. What happens with all these cuts and another child is born with the same condition as my son for palliative care? There's no fixed limit how long a child lives with the particular condition. Could live into the 30s. I mean, the oldest one were 35, John Kennedy. But for 35 years of that person's life was nurtured within the NHS for the dresses to be changed, the Broviac line, the gastro tube, the dressings had to be changed at least 6 times a day. And, you know, if a child is born with this condition, especially in a place with Barnsley, with I mean, Sheffield I was fortunate, if I can use that terminology, because it was Sheffield. So we had the we had the Jessop's Hospital, and then we had the Children's Hospital. These facilities don't exist in Barnsley. And even for palliative care, for 15 weeks of a child's life, diamorphine, changing the medication. It's a long process, and it takes up huge resources. And I am really concerned in a place such as Barnsley for that, you know, the provisions for if a child was born with the same condition. So, okay.
An education has been education until retirement, basically. And I'm a doctor of education, so an educationist rather than a teacher. And I was... Sorry?
Did you take office?
Yeah, shall I do it again? No. Okay, I'm full off, so we're Councillor in Barnsley. almost like Malcolm, I was born 3 weeks after the NHS. So I've been forever grateful for the NHS, not least for my own birth, etc., but also for my daughter, who had anorexia for a long period, extreme anorexia. I'm not going into the details to spare the blushes, but she was on the point of death for quite a long time. Excellent care from the NHS. We would not have got that anywhere else. We would not have got that from the privatised services. Certainly not under the American system. The same daughter, when she was in America, had a minor traffic accident when the minibus she was travelling in crashed or skinned off an HGV in the store. For 3 years after that, I was getting bills from the American health service, which I'm glad to say I got out of pay. I just didn't pay. I'm not planning to go back to America, so it's one experience. Another experience, an acquaintance of mine, a friend actually, died for lack of being able to afford cancer care. That's the kind of system we were looking forward to, if that's the right term, if we go into the American system. And we will go into the American system if we come out of the EU on the Tories' terms. Because they are now clearly speaking of TTIP. We got rid of TTIP on the EU. As the UK, or as UK, probably minus Scotland, we will be in a TTIP situation. Johnson, Gove, etc., and Hunt are looking forward to us becoming the 51st State of the Union. When that guy from Barnsley was, I forgot his name, Hay, when he was leader of the Tory party, he openly spoke about us being the 51st State of the Union. Well, that's what we look forward to if we come out of the EU. So, support the NHS, support the EU.
But Dan Jarvis has sent a message of support, which I'd like to read out briefly. It won't take long. I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I would like to pass on this message of support. I very much share your concerns about the proposed changes to maternity and paediatric services in Barnsley, including the proposals to restructure how services are delivered. I do not believe that withdrawing specialist doctors from every hospital and creating maternity hubs is right for expectant mothers who may experience complications and require additional care. Moreover, I believe that every hospital should have a children's ward that is capable of delivering high quality care with the minimum amount of travel for poorly children to undertake. Like all of you here today, I am opposed to these changes that have the potential to put expectant mothers and seriously ill children at risk. As we campaign to protect services at individual hospitals, we need to bear in mind that the real cause of these cuts, the Tory government that has cut our NHS and public services to the bone over the last 8 years. That is the reality of austerity. The NHS has faced year-on-year reductions in spending and record numbers of staff leaving the service since 2010. 44% of NHS trusts faced a deficit in 2017-18, and across the country the total NHS deficit was around £960 million. Austerity is a political choice, not an economic necessity, and we need to remember that there are always different choices that we can make as a country. We urgently need a different government that will invest in our NHS to reverse the disastrous legacy of austerity. The NHS is the jewel in the crown of our public service, and it needs all of us to preserve and protect it for the next generation. Thank you for taking the time to come today and for standing up to save our NHS.
To try and inject a little bit of optimism into the meeting, because like the stories that people have been telling obviously shows the terrible threat that the NHS is under. Not just the threat, but cuts that are taking place. One of the really serious attacks we've already had at Barnsley Hospital is the idea of outsourcing various services. People can actually fight back against that. In Bolton, I don't know if people have seen, the domestic and portering services were outsourced. And then the company that took it over decided it was going to not pay out the NHS rates of pay to the people that have been tupied over. There's been strike action, and the bosses have been forced to actually pay the NHS rates. Now that's quite a good story. There's an even better one from Wigan, where they were faced with outsourcing. They took 2 days of strike action, the people that were going to be affected. That didn't have any effect, so they voted for 5 days of strike action, and now the outsourcing isn't going to take place. And it shows that when people actually stand up and fight back, it can have a really significant effect. Now, like as Felicity said from Liverpool, one of the problems is that the state of the unions in the hospital, the fear that is there among sort of the people working, is such that it's very hard for them to put their heads up above the parapet and take that kind of action. And the rest of us, through campaigns like the Save Our NHS, we need to try and create that climate where people start to feel that confidence they're prepared to do that. Last year, the Trades Council and the Save Our NHS group in Barnsley worked together on the May Day March. There will be a May Day March in Barnsley again next May. It's a good time to have it, really, a May Day March, isn't it? I would like to see that the Save Our NHS group actually at the head of the march next May, that we really sort of show that the trade union movement is there supporting the fight back. And just to finish, sort of one little example, there's a strike at the moment among staff at the Ladywood Primary School in Grimethorpe. 9 dinner ladies faced with losing their jobs. 2 teaching assistants threatened. They've come out on all-out indefinite strike, and the support they've had from the parents and the local community is enormous. They didn't think they would have that kind of support until they came out. And I think it's the message that comes out time and time again in trade union disputes. People in the workplace don't realise the tremendous support they can have until they come out and then they find that the community is there for them. So let's just make sure that people know that we're there, prepared to support the kind of action that can win against all these cuts.
And I've always voted Conservative. Well, I've listened and I believe Conservatives are for privatisation, and I'm not. I'm certainly not after what. In fact, I depended on the NHS because of my own health. I'm registered disabled, and I don't think I'm voting Conservative anymore. I know it's mentioned, and that is we can all pray. We can all pray, and God is God doesn't change, and I think that's a good thing. I've got a strong faith, and yes, I should be voting Labour. I don't like Jeremy Corbyn particularly. I don't hate anyone, but yes, I should be voting Labour.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank George for his note of optimism, and also from Sheffield Save Our NHS. We have a lesson that when people get together, we can win on these campaigns. And so when they decided in Sheffield that they wanted to shut down our minor injuries unit and shut down the walk-in centre in town and move everything to the Northern General, there was a bit of tut-tutting, and there was a very phony consultation that went on, like Felicity said, where they put out a consultation that said, option 1 is what I've just told you. Option 2, believe it or not, was the same with a different label on the door. Option 3 was the same. It was a little bit different for the children. But basically, they insulted us by having a consultation where the 3 options all meant no more minor injuries in town, no more walking centre. And so what did we do? We ran petitions, we ran street stalls, we had demonstrations outside the hospital, in town, we had people tooting, we had lorries tooting outside the CCG because we went to their meetings and we asked them awkward questions. And so this is what we need to do again. And just like Felicity, they had a magnificent demo in Liverpool, coinciding with the Labour conference. And so what I'm saying is that, you know, there are plenty of examples, but people have to get off their backsides and do stuff. And so do support Barnsley Save Our NHS. There are plenty of people in the room, and I'm sure they're going to announce their meetings. And get involved and do what you can. And if you want to know about the conference in Birmingham about social care, it's on the free newspaper over there. But I've just got a flyer if you want to support that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Kerrin, you mentioned it was about the health service review, about the amount of staff required to keep using safe and functioning. How many paediatric consultants are there?
There's 8 general paediatric consultants on the acute thing. We've got some colleagues working in the community.
And how many of you will be retiring in the next 5 or 7 years?
A few of us will be, but obviously we're hoping that if we've got a good service and a good unit with a good reputation, that the junior doctors who come and train with us will then aspire to sort of take our place, and we hope to sort of lead by example.
We have got one or two who've said that they would love to come back and be a consultant in Barnsley to us as well. I work with Dr. Kerrin, I'm one of the secretaries, and there's a lot who said when you go that they'd like to take your place because they love it in Barnsley. So,
I'm just aware that, you know, what have we got about, did you say 6? 8? And how many of you are sort of 53 plus and will be retiring? It's probably 4 or 5.
70.
It is a general point. I mean, I think the Health Services Review and other people reflect that in terms of midwives and nurses and so on, people coming through how they might retire. So I think these workforce issues are real, and that's why people do try to plan ahead. As I say, you know, we may not have there may be a few of my colleagues that are either going to retire, but I suppose what we aim to do is have a robust enough service that works well, that can encourage people to work here so that we do enable that to be sustained. And I think there will be challenges in paediatrics and in other specialties across the country in terms of keeping those levels up, but all we can do locally is, you know, have as good quality service as we possibly can to attract those people from elsewhere.
Asking each of the speakers just to round up in a couple of minutes each. Terry, please.
I'll just start by running through some of the points that people have raised. First speaker was, she's gone, who was talking about general nursing and the pressures in all departments in hospitals. I'm an ex-general nurse, adult nurse, and then a community nurse, and I left because of the pressures. It's not sustainable. The NHS is not sustainable the way it's being run because the staff can't do the job that they want to do. It's dead simple, actually. You can't dress it up, you can't make it fancy. It just is damned hard work, and you know at the end of the day when you go home you've not done the job that you were trained to do. Privatisation, Pete said, you know, this is about privatisation. I absolutely think that this is about privatisation, and there were a couple of things that Dr. Kerrin sort of said about that it didn't necessarily apply to children's services. I actually think that this could apply to any service. There isn't a single part of the NHS that can't be delivered by the private sector. All they'll do is they'll take over what's already there in a private company, and then they will alter the costs and the terms and conditions of the people that work there. And the fact that there's a new paediatric consultant in Barnsley, the new unit, doesn't actually fill me with any confidence, because in the Hospital Services Review, what it says is this hub system that they're planning to bring in means that the host of the network can deploy staff and patients. So you go to a hospital and there isn't a bed for you there, you're not necessarily going to get sent to the nearest one. You'll get sent to where there's a vacancy. And that might be Bassetlaw. That might be, well, God knows where it might be. And it also has a nice little line in it that says staff can be deployed wherever there is. So you're a midwife and you turn up at Jessop's and they say, really sorry mate, you're off to Bassetlaw this morning. And I really do think that that's an important point to make. Resources for care and you know, the point about if you need expensive care, if you've got somebody, you know, the Better Births Review that was referred to by, I can't remember whether it was you or it was you. The Better Births Review is absolutely explicit in its goal to privatise, and it does so by saying that mums will be given a voucher to buy their maternity care. Right? That's absolutely bloody brilliant if you have no problems whatsoever. You know, what happens if something goes wrong? What happens if you're diabetic? What happens if, you know, there are a million things. I can't even remember what I flipping had when I had high blood pressure and what was that called?
Hypertension.
No, you know, I did have toxemia, but I was really quite pre-eclampsia. That's the one. I had pre-eclampsia with my first. You know, would my voucher cover it, or am I having to try and find some money just because I've unfortunately got a medical condition? You know what? Let's not sort of pretend that this isn't what it is. George, let's fight outsourcing. Absolutely, let's fight outsourcing. Absolutely, all the time that we can. Taking up the slack elsewhere, that was mentioned, about people being moved to a different centre, and about, you know, having children in the community, home births, but also about looking after sick children in the community. And I know that there are some community children's nurses, but there aren't very many. And there's nothing in the report that I can find that says that they're going to increase the number of community children's nurses. And you can't put people out there and say, oh, well, they can be looked after out there, without putting the resources in to do it. And, you know, as a community nurse, that's something that I picked up on straight away. And look at mental health. You know, let's have care in the community for mental health services. What happened? What happened? They just closed all the beds, they closed all the units, they kicked you out, and when there wasn't enough services out there was nothing for you. And actually, I'm sorry, but I would love to have been optimistic. I really would have loved to have been optimistic. But I can't be optimistic because this terrifies me. This absolutely terrifies me, and I think that this is the thin edge of the wedge, and I think we are heading to a totally privatised system where people who can't afford it will get second-class health care. Oh, and Barnsley Save Our NHS's next meeting is Monday the 5th of November at 5 o'clock in the library. And please come.
Thank you. I agree with most of what's been said, but I think it is really important that we hold to account the people who've actually made it health service policy since 1993, that we have a good midwifery service that offers choice for women everywhere, not some choices for people when we've just taken the big choice away. And it offers continuity of care. That is policy in this country. And there is a massive canyon between that and what happens on the ground. And I think the power holders need to be held to account. We need good services, not moving staff around to plug the gap in services where the cracks are so big they can't be plugged. We need to care for our staff so they can care for all the people who need them. And I think we should campaign to have a freestanding birth centre and a good home birth service in Barnsley alongside the consultancy. It's not
Just to reiterate, I mean, I share a lot of the concerns generally about privatisation, agenda and so on. I'm not disputing any of that. I suppose my focus specifically in relation to this is just to ensure that people are aware that this is going on and to spread the word. And next year, when they start talking about site-specific things, when they start looking at which of the 1 or 2 units they might think to change things, that people are aware and then prepared to make the arguments to help continue to support our local services.
In terms of social care, we've got to realise there has already been a 40% cut in funding for social care nationally. 40%. And there's been some money recently given to the care sector, of which 3 billion has come from the NHS budget. So we've got a mega cut in social care, and the NHS is supporting. The NHS, publicly provided, not-for-profit, supposedly supporting the private sector. We want to nationalise social care, make it a national care service. The financial support from local authorities has decreased by over 40%. Now, I absolutely support the idea that we should be talking about good choice in maternity. Our children matter, and at the moment, if you're the third child, you get nothing for benefit. Our children are dying. More children are dying before they're one. Those numbers are going up. Our children are in poverty and are in hunger. And if we don't say our kids matter, nobody will. We've got to break that taboo and actually say our children matter. And it's not good enough for their services to be cut. Now, the NHS is seriously still a jewel in the crown of the British nation, whatever you call it. It's still there, still that good, because the workers in the NHS have worked so hard. I'm convinced the government thinks they've broken them by now, but they haven't. They are. Individuals can't take it any longer. Very, very talented individuals can't take it any longer. A close friend who's a clinical psychologist for children has just had to pack in. She cannot take it any longer. She won't survive, her own mental health won't survive if she stays there. We've got to say, we're going to make a health service so people are happy to come back to it. And those who've left to come back to it. We desperately need every person in the land to have access to good health care. We've done a freedom of information about what they've been charging migrant women from our hospital. And the biggest charge they've made to migrant women is £12,000. £12,000 for one woman's care. And they ask you for it up front. Now, eventually they can't. The law got to give you the treatment, but they ask you for it up front. Now, lots of women can't get free maternity care in this country anymore. Lots of them. Some of them just run up the debt that if you're applying for citizenship and you've got a debt, you can't get your citizenship, you're more likely to be deported. So lots of women just aren't going to the hospital and having their babies without care. Makes me scream, but you know, we've got a conference on that in Liverpool next week, on November the 3rd. And we'll publish to you all the figures we've got. We're getting more and more figures the more we study it. This hostile environment applies to babies. Women who have, this is their home, this is where they're living. We're not talking about someone who jumps on the plane. This is people who live here, not able to get free maternity care. So, it's worth the fight. We've got a brilliant healthcare system, far better than the States, far, far better than the United States. It's worth saving. And there's a fantastic workforce there that work their cotton socks off that we should be supporting and we should be praising. But we've also got to talk to them. It's like little fires all over the country, all of these health service campaigns. I mean, Shrewsbury and the Shropshire maternity units, you'll have heard of them. They fought like mad, and again they're now being told they're closed. 300 maternity units closed their doors to women at different stages last year. We've got a real crisis on our hands, but we've also got beginnings of a huge movement. You know, we can be the Chartists of the NHS. That's building up, and keep that fight going. But please, please, you know, be prepared to speak out and to talk. Doing your stalls, talking to people on the stalls is really important. What we've done, one of the things we've done for the 3 years we've been going now, we've always gone to where there are women who appear to be thinking. So we've gone to the Run for Life, the Race for Life, because they're people prepared to get out and do something, and they tend to be younger women. Had fantastic support from them. Where you can get at leaflets in the schools about what's happening to the maternity units, that would make a real difference. You know, going and asking for money up front to some of the unions. Go and ask the GMB, we want some money. We've had fantastic support from the GMB, we've had fantastic support from Unite. Go and ask them for money because they want to see the reaction. And yes, brilliant. I was on the picket line with the Wigan women and I wouldn't have dared cross them. They were fantastic. They weren't having any nonsense and they won. We can get that story out. Look at what happened in Glasgow. Yes. The women in Glasgow are prepared to come out and do something. And don't forget to send a letter if you can to the young lady who's been threatened she'll never teach again because she wouldn't cross a picket line. We know already that the head teacher's a bit annoyed by the fact they're snowed under with letters of support for her. Keep the letters coming in. And please do keep in touch. I'll try and write something up in the next couple of days about the issues we've had and put it on the Save Liverpool Women's Hospital blog and share it around. But also, do it yourself. Put your own ideas on social media. Doesn't have to be anything complicated. Fight wherever you can for the NHS, because without it, we truly are lost. Thank you.
Right, I'd like to extend a huge vote of thanks to all of our speakers today, especially Felicity, who's had to travel under very difficult circumstances to get here. And I'd also like to thank you for coming as well, because, you know, there are more people here than I've seen at any meeting recently. One of the problems, as Felicity has said, is to get the message out there. From my point of view, one of the things that really matters me is that the people making these decisions are not publicly accountable to anyone. Now, there's no one directly elected into a position of power within the NHS, so you know you can't go and campaign against them or stand against them. The local council, Barnsley Council, has taken a very pragmatic view on this, that it reserves its position on changes, but will oppose any which are really detrimental to the people of Barnsley, but on the other hand, hasn't really got any power to do much about it. Now, there have been 3 councillors in the room here today. I suggest that you go and natter your local councillors and tell them that it is an issue for you. I suggest that you go to your MPs and natter your MPs, natter anybody in any position of influence. The chair of the CCG, for example, turn up to the CCG meetings. They are as boring as hell, I'll tell you now. But there is a slot of 15 minutes where the public can ask questions. You stand up and tell them that you don't like what's going on and why you don't like what's going on. And the main thing for me is that all this is being done in the dark. Yeah. It's been done underhand. Yeah? They claim to have public meetings, but there's no publicity. They claim to consult. Well, they consult the usual suspects. And you know, a couple of hundred people out of a population in South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw of about 1.25 million actually take part in the consultation. So nothing will change unless we make it change. And last but not least, I see that Lee and Steve are itching with the buckets there. There used to be a collection to help pay for the room. So if you can afford to contribute, please do so. And once again, thanks again for coming and a safe journey home.
Thank you.